All right, good morning, everybody. It is the beginning of March 5th, and we're going to be doing a kind of a overview wrap-up of where we have been. Last time we left off, we were looking at people who were in exile in Babylon, and two groups will emerge. That group that is insistent upon rituals, and if you want to, I'm using now very common American English, if you want to be right with God and do what God wants, you have to do rituals and you have to do them in a certain way. It is also understood that nothing is right unless God is in God's temple in Jerusalem, which is the center of it all. And to please God, you must have certain rituals and certain ways of doing things. All religions will have an aspect of those who are into rituals and having things done correctly. This is not just Judaism, it is in all religions, at least all that I'm aware of. Certain rituals, certain things that must be done, and there must be certain people trained to do them well. There is another group that will take a look at things and are absolutely convinced by having a certain view of God and God's behavior that people are in exile because they did not follow what God wanted, and God was punishing them to get them right, to learn how to behave right. This first group will be called P for priestly, and they will literally lace the Hebrew Bible, especially the first 5 books, with all kinds of rituals and vestments. The second group we'll call D, Deuteronomy. This will form the basis of the book of Deuteronomy and an understanding that there is a certain way to view history and a correct way to view history, and that's their way of viewing history. And you're going to see regularly, and this did not please God. This was not right in the eyes of God. And they will make commentary all along if something did not agree with their worldview. Now, along with this comes snippets in the Hebrew Bible that are right there in front of us that we don't see. And I'm going to give you some of those snippets to show you that while these two views predominate in the way in terms of traditional teaching, both in Christianity and in Judaism, there are all kinds of snippets there that tell us these views are not quite getting it right. Let me give you an example. In the book of Exodus, in chapter 28, there is a whole discussion about what priests should be wearing. An elaborate garment worn by a high priest, a breastplate, gold, blue, and purple and scarlet bands, and on and on and on and on. I remember reading this and thinking nothing about it until finally, decades later, it suddenly dawned on me, wait a minute, who's in the desert? A bunch of peasants. Where are a bunch of peasants going to be getting gold, blue, purple, and scarlet bands? Where are a bunch of peasants going to be getting a breastplate? And where are a bunch of peasants going to be talking about what a priest should wear in the temple when there was no temple for hundreds of years? This predates this desert story, the building of the temple, by several hundreds of years. So I'm thinking, wait a minute. How can we be talking about priests when there was no temple to have priests to begin with? How can we be talking about what priests should wear when there were no priests? And where would they get the material to begin with? Never dawned on me. This doesn't make any sense at all. The priest then will try to superimpose upon the narrative priest behavior, priest dress, priest rituals. And it's like taking now and going back in time and superimposing a whole worldview. But just think about that. I've told you this before. You take a look at, for instance, the whole story of the 10 Commandments. We've been through this before. Moses comes down the mountain and they're worshiping a golden calf. And I raised the question very, very quickly. Number one, how are you going to make a golden calf? Well, you're going to need to melt gold. And what are you going to melt gold in? A crucible. Have you ever seen crucibles from 1200 BCE? No, you haven't. Why would you? They're enormous. Wait a minute. A bunch of us are peasants and somebody says, stop, we got to bring a crucible. And somebody says, Clausen, how are we going to drag that thing? It's going to take oxen. Are you out of your mind? We don't have time for this. We're going to get killed. We don't have time for carrying a big lug crucible. How are you going to get the crucible hot enough to melt gold? I looked up how hot it has to be melting gold. There is nothing now and never has been anything in the Sinai to make the heat that you're going to need to get the crucible hot to melt gold. And finally, what are you going to pour the gold in once it's melted? Now, that just happens to remember to bring by a beautiful golden calf mold. Right. We're fleeing for our lives. And she's, wait, stop. I've got this thing that we're going to melt gold in. None of this ever appeared to any of us when we're reading these stories, and I don't know why. And finally, I told you when they've unearthed golden calves, they were never worshipped to begin with. They had striations on the back of the calf. They were pedestals on which it was understood that God symbolically stood to ward off the baddies coming in the north of the kingdom of Israel and the south of the kingdom of Israel. That's where they were found, in the kingdom of Israel. And they were never worshipped, ever. They were considered massive pedestals for God symbolically standing and guarding. All right, moving along then. Then we find probably the one kind of person you would never know anything about, and had it not been for archaeology. In the Hebrew Bible, in the books of Kings, and you're going to read about the king Manasseh. Manasseh was the son of Hezekiah, and you're going to read he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Again and again, direct quote, again and again and again. It turns out he executed people who disagreed with him, and he did not follow Yahweh the way he was supposed to. So I looked up a little bit about Manasseh, and it turns out he had one of the longest and most successful reigns in the history of both Israel and Judah. Over 50 years, he had a reign of peace and prosperity. Ooh. Now, how are you going to square the secular story of Manasseh, 50 years of peace and prosperity, versus a group coming out of Babylon saying he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord? You need to know that there is other history. Now, I'm not finished. You're going to find that according to this group D, who had this history of Moses, they also had the idea, and they pushed it on us, that Joshua led a three-pronged attack from the desert into the land of Canaan and wiped out the Canaanites. It was a massive, magnificent victory in the eyes of God. And you may remember that there was the fortress at Jericho, and the priest went around 7 times blaring trumpets out of tune. Everything stopped. There was a huge boom, and they fell in, and God's troops triumphed. Well, it turns out archaeologists came up with a different story. The town of Jericho is on the same fault line that goes all the way to the Dardanelles. And guess what other major city is on the same fault line? Troy. It turns out Troy was destroyed by a bunch of Greeks hiding out in some fake horse. That's a nice story. It never happened. Troy is on a fault line where earthquakes happen regularly. And it turns out there are at least 22 or 23 Troys built on the same spot. That earthquake goes all the way down to Jericho. And it turns out in archaeology, you can tell whether the city was destroyed by attack or by earthquake. Now, lest I appear smart, I didn't know this. So I had to look it up. It turns out when a town is destroyed by an earthquake, the things fall in. And so you excavate, you can tell if things fell in by as if it's attacked and things fall down straight because they're set on fire. Bet you didn't know that. If a town is attacked and it's set on fire, destroyed, things fall down like this. If it's an earthquake, they fall in. Jericho was destroyed by an earthquake. By the way, you might want to know parenthetically, why was Troy built and rebuilt? If you go down a couple of miles from Troy, you go to the sea, then you go to the beach of that area that goes up to the Black Sea. Do you know your map, everybody? Let me see if I can pull up a map. This is one of those things that they don't teach you. Let's see. Map. No. We want Nope, 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 nope. Okay, let me try this again. Hold it, hold it. Where is, no, we want, come on, where can I see? Ah. Can you all see this right here? Can you all see this right here? Can everybody see this?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, let me explain you what Troy's all about. Along here is a great beach line. As you can see down here, here's the Black Sea. You see, can you all see this down here? Here's the Black Sea. Can you see this? All right.
Yes.
To go from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, you have to go up in this little area here. And imagine right here, anywhere, and I forget, I think Troy was right about here. When the tide is going this way, it's easy to go in to the Black Sea. You go in and follow the tide. When the tide is coming out, you're stuck. It's too strong. So what the people did is they beached their boats all along here till the tide turned. So imagine Pat and Ray and Maureen pull their boats in to beach. And who comes down the beach but Kenneth and Bobby Vance and Maureen Sullivan saying, "Hi, everybody. It's nice of you to beach your boats. There's only one problem. If you look behind you, there's a 2,000-man army, and you're not leaving unless you pay us." Ah, yes, absolute extortion. The Trojans made an absolute mint by captivating and holding all the beaches. And the only way you're going to get into the Black Sea is you have to wait to go with the tide to take it in. It's narrow enough right here. You can't sail. You can't row. It's too strong. So they've got it captive. And that's what this was all about. Owning all the beaches here, which you needed to beach on till the tide comes in. I bet you nobody knew that. I didn't either till I looked it up. I wanted to know why Troy was such a big deal. And there it is, the Black Sea. To get up through here, right into here, to get into the Sea of Mimosa and then into there, you had to go up into here. And this is where the Trojans had all the sea, all the coast, all the beach land. That's why that was such a pain. Okay, so you have a fault line. So then you get the Deuteronomist giving this great story of the Canaanites being wiped out by this massive attack, three-pronged attack. It never happened. The city of Jericho was not wiped out by trumpet-playing priests running around in a circle 7 times. It was destroyed by an earthquake. And finally, listen to this. If you go to the book of Judges, it's going to read for you the following. Just bear with me, because it's going to show you how somebody kept alive census counts. And it's not going to make any sense until I finish. Just let me read it to you. The Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. So obviously this God was not very strong because he was good for the mountain, but he couldn't overcome chariots of iron. That's exactly what it says. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ebelim and its villages, the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, but the Canaanites grew strong in the land. Moving right along. Zebulon could not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron. Ashon could not drive out the inhabitants of Akko. Naphtali could not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh. The Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country, but they did not allow them to come down to the plain. So Israelites lived amongst Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. That's what the old census said. There was no three-pronged attack by Joshua. What you have is people moving in, nomads and semi-nomads, getting in squabbles and discussions, if you will, some armed combat with villages, and basically they all had to learn to live together. And these are from old censuses. So I remember teaching an Old Testament class, and we took out of the land of Canaan, and we put pins in all the areas that were red, that were supposedly the Israelites, and we took blue in all the Canaanites. The whole area was blue with little dots of red. So someone kept a list of what was actually on the ground. And it was interesting that finally, when they were putting this whole thing together, somebody had access to those lists and snuck them in anyway. So while you have one overview of we came in and wiped them all out and took it, somebody said, well, you know, that's not quite true. And they snuck these lists in, and Lord only knows who kept these, but they go back to the beginning. So you need to know that that you've got two very, very different stories. Now, you know, you have two Genesis stories, the story of the Garden of Eden and the 7 days. You have two flood stories, 40 days and 40 nights, but you have another one that's 150 days. Most people don't realize that. So you have lots of doublets. You also have, in all of this storytelling, two huge counterpoints. You have Job, who we discussed 2 summers ago, in which Job ends, according to the latest scholarship, saying, if this is what God is, I feel sorry for everybody. When you get God not answering, why do bad things happen to good people? You're just supposed to worship God, and that's it. You're not supposed to question. And then Ecclesiastes has that very famous counterpoint. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor riches to the wise, but time and chance happen to them all. Whoa. These are two very, very strong counterpoints to God is in charge, and if you don't do it his way, you're going to get bammed. So what we have then are competing narratives, and an editor will try to piece these together. You get stories from the beginning. You get the priestly attempt to keep the rituals alive and well. You get the Deuteronomists, that group that says there is a history here and we've got it, but there are counterpoints to that history. And on top of all of this, I missed a group that was left behind. Now, I want to share with this because I made a mistake with this. I had an omission, and the omission is this. In 722, when Israelites were deported by the Assyrians to Mosul and areas like that, and a whole bunch of new people were brought in, some of those Israelites stayed behind. And we never give them credit. I went over this before because we don't. They got stuck. They had land. All the people they knew that were leaders were gone. The people that took care of the shrines were gone. So you had hard-working peasants and poor people left, stuck. In comes in a whole new class of people, whole new way of doing things, and they had to adjust. And nobody gives them credit. Nobody gives them credit, and adjust they did. And finally, intermarriage, you worked out contracts and social covenants, and life continues. The second group that gets left behind is in 586, comes the second deportation to Babylon, and who gets left behind again? The poor, the peasants, in what is left of Judah. And they may do the best they can, and nobody ever gives them credit either. Peasants who are left behind because they don't have any social advocate, nobody pays any attention to them, but they have to survive. And what do? They take and try to mend the land the best they can. They grow what crops they can. They have animal husbandry, sheep and goats and what you can. And they try to make do with the ruins around them. And they find other people there and they will intermarry. Now you have this group, finally, 2 generations later, who are allowed to leave Babylon under Cyrus of Persia. The Persians have now taken over, and they come back to Jerusalem. They come back to Jerusalem. And what do? They come back with a bunch of demands and ideas. It is Ezra who will come back and demand that all of you divorce your foreign spouses. They're not foreign, they live there. It's rude to say they're foreign. He says, all of you who have done whatever it is to survive, well, guess what? What you've done is not good enough. And Ezra demands that you put away women who are not Israelite, and you redo your religion the way he sees it ought to be done. And then comes Nehemiah, who was a cupbearer to the king. And there's a big argument who came first, Nehemiah or Ezra. Both demand and demand and demand. Now, in all of this, we forgot something else. Who else is left behind? What about the people in Babylon who decided not to go back to Jerusalem? Think about that for a minute. Not everybody left Babylon. In fact, it might surprise you to know most people stayed. Now, let's look at this right here. Well, we're getting to that, Maureen. You're always 2 steps ahead of me. Let me get there. All right. So take a look at this. Here we are right now. We're in exile. We've been in exile now in Miami for, I have fun with this. We came from Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota. We have been exiled here in Miami now 2 generations. Holly and AJ said, we're going back. We're allowed to go back. And the rest of us have to take counsel because we're all from Rochester, Minnesota. No, we aren't. Our great-great-great-grandparents were. And at this point, Karen Paul says, do you all remember what it's like? Does anybody know what the temperature is like in Rochester? And Karen says, I do research. I teach. I found it's cold there like all the time. Like, from October to May, it's cold and gray and nasty. And the rest say, really? And then Barbara Young says, it's funny. I have this thing written that's been handed down as well, saying we arrived in this strange place and it was warm and delightful. And she said, I never thought about that very much. And Pat Sullivan says, I can wear a bikini and surf. And we all looked at her and said, please don't wear a bikini and don't even think of surfing. I'm going to rack up I'm going to rack up the karma on this one. And you're all going to say to me, they're going to look at Holly and AJ and say, we'll all be danes and we be nude. No, you better put on clothes. I've been to, just let me say, the first nude beach I ever went to was in St. Martin. And I was on vacation, and congregants of mine in Port Orange had a villa on St. Martin, and they gave it to me for 2 weeks a year to go for vacation. And so I had never been to a nude beach before. So I went to a nude beach. It was called Orient Beach. And no, I did not go nude because I knew with my luck, I knew exactly what would get sunburnt and burnt to a crisp within a half hour. So I wore surfing jams. I go to the beach, and now I understand why people wear clothes. I went to the nude beach, and just let me say that some people ought not to wear clothes, ought not to go nude in public. In fact, my observation of most of the people on the beach was that most of them ought not to go nude in public. That's just an observation. Until somebody, I was complaining about this. No, I'm fine, Maureen. I'm glad. I'm just saying that just my observation. Until I was at this party on Marigot, and somebody was first of all saying, why do you Americans all hate the French? And I said, I don't know about that. They said, it's not the French, it's the Parisians. We all hate the Parisians. Don't confuse the French with the Parisians. And all these people were talking about these nasty Parisians. And I said, and then I happened to mention a comment about the new base. Said, no, you need to go where the locals go. Let me tell you, I was taken to the local beach where you were everywhere between 16 and 20. I don't think you were allowed on the beach if you were over 20 or under 16 because it was only the pure and trim. So I figured out nude beaches are great for the nude and the trim and those who have no shame. The rest of us do not belong on nude beaches, is just my observation for what it's worth. I'll stop. All right, moving along. What do you do? What do you do when you're here in exile and Holly and AJ want to go back? Karen says, do you know what it's really like that there? Barbara says, I have this thing that I never understood what it meant. Pat's talking about surfing. How you can't surf in Rochester, Minnesota. You'll freeze 2 minutes outside the door. You'll be a block of ice with a board under your hand. Danny Sorkin said, you know, maybe we could go for a month. I said, you don't go all the way back for a month and come back. And Danny is going to be the first one who says, why not? We can go back and forth. So you're going to get then really kind of three groups. You're going to get the small group that decides to go back. Most of us are going to stay, and a few will be intrepid and go back and forth. Yeah. And I think that's probably really what happened. A few went back and were not happy by the reception they got. Ezra makes that very, very clear. And so does Nehemiah. They were not happy by the reception. Now, let's talk about the reception. Imagine you and I are peasants. We work hard and we smell. We're around animals all the time. We're out in the sun digging ditches and dirt and stuff and plants. And these perfumed, turbaned, I can use some other adjectives, arrive with their servants and camels, thank you very much, and begin to tell us how to behave and what to do. You can imagine with a mouth like mine, what I could tell them what they could do. It was not a pretty sight. The other group who stayed, the overwhelming majority stayed, how do you think they felt? Now let's turn the corner around. You and I are in Babylon. And these guys take off to go back to Jerusalem. And next thing we know, a generation later, they're telling us that we're not doing it right either. Yes, they're telling us that we have become followers and we're followers of Babylonian science. We are followers of astrology, that we've adopted some Babylonian dress. Some of us have even married Babylonians, then later on Persians. Some of us will have children that are mixed. Miscreants, absolutely, it's terrible. So all of those who get left behind, who are trying to survive the best they can, get hammered by a small group of purists who are taking history as they're defining it and trying to pretend this history is true. It's like the Ukraine never existed. It only existed since 1920 when Lenin made it out of nothing. It's always been Mother Russia. By the way, did you hear the former president telling us that it was him that got NATO going? Did you hear that the other day? He got up and had the nerve to say, it was because of me that NATO is what it is today. And everybody was going, you hated NATO. You wanted us to drop out of NATO. And I couldn't believe it, by the way. The ex-vice president told him there is no room in the GOP for followers of Putin. Moving, if you want to see things in action, here it is. So what I'm trying to say is we've had three groups left behind. The 722 crowd, peasants, hardworking peasants trying to get by. And who do they have to deal with? A whole influx of infidels from what we call Mosul, that whole area of Iraq, who don't know the language. You get two groups of people who don't know each other, different classes, different dress, different smells, different ways of dressing and looking at, and they somehow had to put it together. It took a long time, but they did. You get the crew that's left after 586 in Jerusalem, what's left of it, it's destroyed. And then you get the other group left behind in Babylon, the overwhelming majority who are very happy in Babylon. They learned, they wrote, they intermingled, they had a life there. And out of this, we get a small group of P and D who decide to look at the world from their lens and decide their lens is correct and everybody else is wrong. Now, I wish somebody would have told me this when I was growing up and getting hammered with the Bible says. Yeah, Maureen, they had a very good life in Babylon intellectually. Some of our greatest Jewish writing comes from the Babylonian Jews, from Babylonian Judah. The Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, is excellent. Of course it did. Yes, Maureen, of course it did. Babylonian Talmud is, there are two Talmuds that are considered. There's what's the word I want? Judean Talmud, the Palestinian Talmud, after the fall of Jerusalem. But there's also the Babylonian Talmud, which is much, much greater and held in much more esteem. Yeah, the Jerusalem Talmud. Yes, okay. But it's the Babylonians, that the Jews in Babylon that stayed there for 1,000 years, writing and reflecting. Okay, now having said that, those left behind do not get the honor and what they deserve. And what we wound up is a small group that says it's our lens that counts. Now, let me just share that in Judaism, one of the things that you and I do not know if we're not Jewish is that Judaism has been far more diverse than I think most of us realize. If you go to the United States today, nobody is sure just how many Jews there are in the United States or there are in the world. The low count is 14. Yes, absolutely. The Babylonian version was considered far, far more intellectual. As I said, the Babylonians who stayed behind were really quite, and they stayed there for at least 1,000 years or more. In fact, there was a community in Iraq up to the 20th century, very strong community, and Iran as well. And in Iran as well, we tend to forget that. Me too. And in Northern Africa. All right. Having said that. I lost my train of thought. Having said what we've got about the diversity, in the United States, we're not sure how many Jews there are in the world. Low count of 14 million, high count of 21 million. Why? Because what does it mean to be Jewish? By the same token, what does it mean to be Christian? And by the same token, what does it mean to be Islam? You get the traditional definitions, but that doesn't count either. For instance, in this country, in the United States, we have probably, a guesstimate is 50% of Jewish people in this country belong to synagogues or to other congregations. I think about 20% of the UUA, Unitarians, are Jewish. I think about 22%, if I remember correctly. So you've got Jewish people who affiliate with a congregation. 50% is the estimate of Jews in this country who are not interested in any religion, but identify only as ethnically Jewish, if that's making sense. You might say people who have Jewish heritage, but they're not interested in any faith community. Is everybody following me what I mean by that? All right. In Islam today, a phrase is coming up when we get, yeah, Maureen points out you can only be Jewish through matrimony, through the mother or conversion, and half the Jews don't recognize conversion. We have to remember that too. By the way, why do they recognize only through the mother? Because you always knew who the mother is. You don't know who the father is. Sorry about that. Except with DNA, and as we all know, many people have been surprised when they've done DNA and found out their father or their mother was not their father or their mother. As you well know. Now, the other thing is, there's a whole new phrase now called secular Muslims, secular Islam. I have lots of people I know who claim to be Muslim. They have never been in a mosque, ever. Before COVID, I used to have classes that had lots and lots of students from, oh, come on. Why do I keep on doing this? Help me out. On the Arabian Peninsula, the really, really cool place at the top. On the Arabian Peninsula, over the left. Oh, come on, the oil fields. Oh, come on.
Not Kuwait.
No, above it.
Above Kuwait?
Help me out.
Above Kuwait is Iraq, isn't it?
maybe, do you mean maybe the Bahrain or the United Arab Emirates or something like that?
Kuwait, you're right. I'm sorry, Kuwait. You're right, Kuwait. Kuwait sends a ton of students to the country to get educated, a ton of students. And a whole bunch come to Miami-Dade College, and then they'll transfer out. And every semester I had a bunch, 12 or 15 Kuwaiti students for several years in my world religion classes. None of them had been to the mosque. None of them ever joined, but they all identified as Muslim. And they said, nobody goes to mosque. They said, who goes? They gave me this stuff about who goes to mosque. So they said, who goes to church? And everybody roared in class, but they all identified as Muslim. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, Kuwait has had a Christian community in it almost from the beginning. And it has one of the great refugee centers for Christians in the entire Middle East. I didn't know that either. They have a Jewish community there. And it is like you ought to read Kuwait. They've got some of the best telecommunications, some of the best TV shows, some of the best drama, some of the best theater in the entire Middle East. You ought to read about Kuwait. It is some incredible, and talk about welcoming diversity and welcoming communities and giving them protection. But the students were an absolute riot. And they said, of course we're Muslim. I said, you ever belong to the mosque? They go, who goes to the mosque? I said, we observe. Oh, they were funny about this. We observe Ramadan. And I forget what else they said we observe, just like you guys observe Christmas and Easter. The whole class roared again. And they said, so we're as Muslim as most people are Christian, which cracked everybody up. So they said, yes, we identify as being Muslim, but we don't practice. Some of the Christians in class got very upset. They said, well, we do. I said, all right, relax, relax, relax. What they're trying to say is a lot of Christians in this country say they're Christian, but you never see them except Christmas and Easter. And then they complain about what they don't like about the service. Things have changed since they were growing up, but they complain anyway. So all I'm trying to say is that you're going to get then varieties of Judaism. And I'm going to say it happens from the beginning. It happens from the beginning. You got those who got left behind in 722. That Judaism will continue, but in its own unique way. You get the Jews who are left behind in 586. That Judaism continues in its own way. You get the the Jews left behind in Babylon in 520 and 510 and 500, but that continues in its own way. So you're going to have different kinds of Judaism in its history, and nobody seems to get that. All we see is orthodoxy or strict forms of it. Yes, Reform is the biggest form of Judaism in this country that is synagogue, but we always seem to think of, and why do we do this? When we think of religion, we think of its most traditional parts, and I don't know why. Think of Judaism, you think of orthodoxy. You think of, well, I'm saying it's my class. I'm thinking of the way my students respond to things. We don't, but I'm saying people in general. You think of, what do you think of Christianity today? You think of Baptists screaming about you can't do this, you can't do that. You get the Christian right who's demanding, has a severe lack of humility and a severe lack of not understanding the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, one of the cut and pastes from the Sermon on the Mount, which is basically a cut and paste of several teachings of Jesus. They're short little sayings. What is his one most famous saying? Judge not lest you be judged. Obviously, there are a gazillion pulpits that have never heard that or seen it anywhere because it certainly isn't practiced. What about humility and kindness? I'm tired of people saying to me, I'll take the Bible literally. I know this is the word of God. And I said, if it's the word of God, why don't you read Micah? And what does the Lord require but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? So we get then groups left behind who do the best they can, and we forget these groups survived and well. So when we read the Bible, we're getting two very strong points of view, and we don't realize there are other points of view as well, unless you take the time to study, and most people don't have the time to do that. Now, one other thing I'd like to Danny, that's one of my two favorite quotes in the Bible. It's I always mess up the chapter. The chapter is it's Micah. Yes, Micah 6. Micah chapter 6, he has told you what is good and what does the Lord require, but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. And I just thought that's one of those quotes that seems to go by the board. It's a great quote. All right. One other thing I want to tell you about that seems to get left out in all this, the tribe of Dan. There were 12 tribes, but when those pesky archaeologists in 1948 started digging things up and found out that the stories of P and D were incorrect. Why? Because there was all Canaanite pots, shards, clothing, what they go, whatever had they a building. There was nothing quote unquote Hebrew. It was all Canaanite. And they said somebody got something very, very wrong. Then when they were digging in where the tribe of Dan is, nothing was Canaanite and nothing was Hebrew. Ooh. So next class, I want to go over the tribe of Dan, and I want to go over the new way it's looking that we have divided up. The real way the scholars are suggesting the Bible was edited and how much later it was edited than you and I were told. So it's called the documentary hypothesis. What do you do with the documents, the timing and dating? And taking a look at a tribe that, guess what, folks, was not even remotely Canaanite, wasn't even remotely Jewish, but decided to federate. They kind of voted, yeah, we're in. We kind of settled down with y'all. Yes, we tend to forget the tribes were there voluntarily. That's something else everybody forgets. When you take a look, you had all these, when I read to you that, that list, by the way, in the very beginning, let me read to you this list again. This is who made up the Canaanites. These were different tribes. The Israelites lived amongst the Canaanites. The Hittites, think of modern Turkey. Think of modern day Turkey. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Major tribes in the land of Canaan. The Hittites in the north, the Jebusites had Jerusalem, the old Salem, and everybody else was in between, and they learned to play well together. They intermarried, they traded, and they worked well together. By the way, speaking of Hittites, I have a Bible question for you. Can anybody remember a very, very famous Hittite in the Hebrew Bible? Anybody at all think of this? You know who it is, too. You know
Uriah?
Yes! Uriah the Hittite, listed as one of the great 30 warriors of Israel. He was the husband of Bathsheba, who David, with great premeditation, murdered. And it's all there in black and white, brought down from the north, and insisted that it be kept in the stories of David, not the whitewash. Oh, yes, that's a whole story in itself. All right, so next class, I want to.
And there's also Jonathan with David too.
Yeah, but that's John. Yeah, but that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about different tribes. That's a whole. By the way, Marius mentioned David and Jonathan. This week coming up in World Religion, we're doing texts and contexts. Now, let me read to you something very quick. I want to show you what I do with students. Bobby just went through this, so he knows this. This is what I read to begin text and context. It's what we do. This kind of college education is not about supporting you in your own prejudices and points of view. This education is about exposing you to and introducing you to all kinds of information, some annoying and some unsettling. Why? So you can learn to make informed choices. You need to have information to make informed choices. This is not just going to support you in your own prejudices and points of view. Here in this class will also see religious texts that can have multiple meanings, multiple interpretations, multiple voice inflections, and the original meaning may be lost. The "it is written" issue. Do you take a text literally or not? And finally, the context of the text can make all the difference on how the text is accepted. And that's how I begin looking at Bible texts and text in general for the next classes next week. Going to give them, and we mentioned David and Jonathan. We mentioned the famous story of how the sons of God took wives for themselves. We talk about the two stories of did God see Moses face to face? Or if you see God face to face, you die, all in the same chapter in Exodus. And we talk about the Nile. Oh, you're going to love the thing I did about the Nile. I put the story of Sargon and the Euphrates. Then I put Pharaoh's daughter washing in the Nile, and I put the baby basket going in the Nile. And we ask everybody to pull up a picture of a crocodile. So as they're talking about biblical text, I said, you need some visuals here, and a visual would be taking a look at a crocodile. Imagine many of these, and you're bathing in the Nile, really? Or you're going to put your own baby on a basket. Now, really, I want to see this. Take out your stopwatch. We'll have a tontine to see how long it takes. So I want you to know what we do is serious work, because if you take things out of context, the hurt that comes from that has been awful in religion. Taking things out of context, the hurt is just awful. Oh, I didn't realize that. It's about David and Bathsheba. I didn't know that. Well, all right, so there we go. This is kind of gives us a wrap up. Next time I want to introduce you to the tribe of Dan and how this brings another influence that D did not like at all. And P couldn't penetrate because they had their own rituals. And then we're going to take a look at the modern dating of how things are. And then I want us to move on to Gospels in Karen Armstrong. That too is a mess. Don't think for a minute that Judaism is the only one that has multiple characters, multiple people left behind, and multiple points of view that conflict very early. Christianity continues this in spades. So this is a kind of reminder that we're looking at multiple layers of thought, multiple layers of experience, and it's our job to enjoy them all with the understanding that we do not take one point of view and say, that's it, and this is it, and if you don't follow it, you're damned, or you're outside of the circle of love. Okay, any questions then before we wrap up for the day? Any questions at all? We got Holly and AJ, who have decided to leave us in Miami and go back to the land of pre-exile, where it is nice and frigid from October to May. Then
It's going to be 60 today, 60. But raining and windy.
You guys don't get any.
Sounds like Scotland.
That reminds me, imagine with my Scots roots, what if somebody said to me, hey, Claus, you won't believe this, but you just inherited a manor and a whole bunch of stuff in Scotland. Would you go? As much as I hate.
If you watched Outlander, you would go.
No, I would not.
No, I love Outlander. I would visit, but I wouldn't want to live there.
I'm sorry, when I left Chicago, it was -14. And 2 days later, I crossed the border in Florida, it was 80. And yes, it's true. I got out of the car and
Cross
kissed the
the
ground.
Rubicon.
I got out of the car and kissed the ground, and I've not been out of Florida except but a couple of times since. So while Holly and AJ have left us, and Nanette has left us, who else has left us? Pat left us. Ray,
Hey, I came back to Miami, bro.
okay, Washington. Ray is in Washington Heights. I got it right. Ray's in Washington Heights.
I haven't left you. I just come to Miami on occasion and then I go back home to New York, but I haven't left you.
Are you here now?
Not right now, no.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she left us. You can't surf in Manhattan.
You could say that she visited you when she left home, on the other hand. Taking a different view.
Thank you, Daniel. Good
Danny's
point.
now been dismissed from the class. So we got Holly and AJ and Nanette.
No, we're all with you in spirit.
That's right. John in Port Orange, Pat in Forest Hills, Barbara and Shrimp in South Miami, Ray in Washington Heights. Karen Paul is not traveling today. She is here in Coral Gables. Bobby and his lovely wife. Would you let us see your lovely wife? I mean, I don't want to say that your face is, thank you. Some beauty in here. Thank you. Good to see you up in Kissimmee. We got Maureen who's recovering. I'm guessing this is Tony Lee, but it may be Cecilia. Danny in
Forest Hills.
Forest Hills. Kathy, our resident Armenian, and Roy in Bellingham. Thank you all very, very much. I will now finish recording this, and we will be seeing it on YouTube in probably a few hours. Be safe and well. Do remember, if you have a chance on the 13th, we want to meet Michelle for a few minutes before the service. Okay. All right, everybody. Have a safe weekend. Bye-bye now.
You too. Take care.